E.M. Forster is a difficult writer to classify. An Edwardian modernist, he criticized Victorian middle-class mores in formally traditional novels. A writer who idealized connection and sincerity above all else. He kept his own homosexuality hidden from the view, but defended D.H. Lawrence's sexually daring Lady Chatterley's lover from obscenity charges. Forster's enduring achievements rest upon his novels, his critical study aspects of the novel, and his continuing principled defense of liberal humanism. By adding death to the picture, the relationship of all other details is transformed, and death itself is revealed as only a detail with no special status. He believed that death destroys a man. The idea of death saves him. So it's kind of a paradox. His self-discovery as a man and a writer came at the moment of embracing this as a truth. The transition from life to death may be as simple and unexpected as a 4-word sentence like Gerald died that afternoon in his novel The Longest Journey. In his story The Road from Colonus, his message was clear, that death may be a savior in disguise. The things that are taken for granted in ordinary life have to be reappraised, like death. So he shows the emptiness of money. Forster had made a persistent and lifelong study of the problem of money and the right ethical attitude to be taken towards it. So death and money are eternal foes and not death and life. The acceptance of the idea of death spiritualizes life, and it is by the root of this notion that Forster finds his own way to the theory, shared by D.H. Lawrence, that the warring principles in existence are not spirit and body, but the human and mechanical, the living spirit and the dead letter. A continual reminding oneself of the great change, death brings home to one the ubiquity of change, the truth that everything in existence is a ceaseless state of flux, and moving or hurled in unknowable directions. For this reason, one cannot be too foreseeing in life, and it is no use preparing too hard, for life is full of false clues and signposts that lead nowhere. What counts is not preparedness, but responsiveness, and a sense for fact. He described his philosophy in his character Wilcox, where of Mr. Wilcox, Forster writes, "No Fagin he, who lives for the now, and he may be wiser than all philosophers. He lived for the 5 minutes that have passed, and the 5 to come. He had the business mind. To live in the now, it is necessary to possess the whole of oneself. And here comes in the doctrine of connection. For in order to possess the whole of oneself, one needs to recognize the connection of all the pieces of oneself, of the beast with the monk, and the prose with the passion. And here the theme of death returns, for it is the idea of death, of one's personal death, that gives one a vantage point from which to survey oneself as a whole. One would be moving in the right direction if one says that he realized Matthew Arnold's dictum about seeing life steadily and seeing it whole, more literally than Arnold ever did. You can see here a reflection of Clarissa's theory of transcendence in Mrs. Dalloway, which means that Virginia Woolf was also inspired by this concept. A quotation from his essay, The Game of Life, puts us right on the track. Once started on the object of life, they lose all diffidence, because to them it is ethical. They love discussing what we ought to be instead of what we have to face. Reams about conduct, and nothing about those agitating aspirations that rise from the ground or fall from the sky. With this we may connect a memorable passage of his about Ibsen's so-called symbolism. To his impassioned vision, dead and damaged things, however contemptible socially, dwell forever in the land of romance. And this is the secret of his so-called symbolism. A connection is found between objects that lead different types of existence. They reinforce one another, and each lives more intensely than before. His immediate point arises from a certain dislike of the literary critical term symbolism, in that it carries a suggestion of some opposition between symbols and realities, and encourages a concern, which must be fruitless, with unrealities. He also objected to the term levels, as applied to the work of literature, saying that he preferred the term aspects, with the same implication that realities are all that count, and realities are whole and indivisible. They do not have separate levels. They merely appear different according to where you look at them from. Now this is a direct reference to Thomas More's philosophy. More's approach to truth and reality is rooted in his commitment to realism and common sense. He argued against the idealism prevalent in the 20th century, which posited that reality is fundamentally mental or spiritual. Instead, Moore maintained that objects exist independently of our perception or knowledge of them. Moore believed in the existence of an external world that we perceive directly. He famously defended common sense beliefs, such as existence of other minds and physical objects. Moore held that truth is a property of propositions. A proposition is true if it corresponds to a fact. Forster's conception of reality should be growing clearer. He had no tendency to see universe as resolving, platonically into a one, or as revealing itself, Buddhistically, as an illusion and mere veil of Maya. He believed indeed that things were not as they seemed, especially as they seemed to the inactive eye. For him, what supremely mattered was human relations. Personal relationships and love were intrinsically good. That is, they were good in themselves and not to be valued just as means to something else. These relations contribute significantly to what he described as organic wholes, which are states of affairs whose value is not merely the sum of their parts, but includes the way in which they are related. He believed that understanding what is good is essential for navigating and improving human relationships. His idea of goodness was inspired by Moore. Moore, in his work Principia Ethica, introduces the concept of naturalistic fallacy and argues for the indefinability of good. Good is simple, indefinable property that cannot be reduced to natural properties such as pleasure or desire. We recognize what is good through intuition. Ethical knowledge is not derived from empirical observation or scientific reasoning, but through direct, non-inferential insight. This suggests that good cannot be equated with any natural property. Good is essentially intrinsic. It was, as we know, characteristic of Moore that he should approach ethics by the way of survey of intrinsic goods or things that are good in themselves. This, as he says in Principia Ethica, is the fundamental question of ethics, the question what things are goods and ends in themselves. And this was so much Forster's own attitude to life and ethics. He so explicitly repudiated Wilcox's approach, which concerned itself with things merely as means, and with the use they could be put to. He attached so much importance to the discrimination of the various intrinsic goods offered by the universe that I would suspect we can detect in him the general climate of thought of Moore's Cambridge. For Moore too, personal relationships and love were the highest of all things that were intrinsically good. That is, love and relationships were good in themselves, and not to be valued just as a means to something else. In a way which may well be related to Moore, Forster insisted always on thinking in terms of positives. It is indeed this insistence that is one of the things which gives his thought originality. His philosophy of death was an optimistic one. It had no connection with theistic philosophies. It is only connected with hedonism, by its stress on living in the moment. The idea of death redirects human thoughts and energies on the right objects, the large concerns like love and beauty. Moore's views on beauty are consistent with his broader metaphysical and ethical positions, and they have inspired E.M. Forster's position on beauty. He considered beauty to be a form of intrinsic value, closely related to the concept of good. Beauty is not merely a subjective experience, but a property that can be appreciated for its own sake. Now, throughout the course of this lecture, we have seen how much G.E. Moore's philosophy has influenced E.M. Forster's philosophy. But how did E.M. Forster even reach or know about the philosophy of G.E. Moore? Because he himself was not an avid reader of philosophy. He had certain channels. The first one being through the Cambridge Apostles, which was an intellectual society at the University of Cambridge. He reached more through the Bloomsbury Group. And by the way, many members of the Bloomsbury Group were also Cambridge Apostles. And then also through Forster's and Moore's mutual friends like Lytton Strachey, Leonard Woolf, John Maynard Keynes. To all of these people, this philosophy was able to reach from Moore to Forster and then to Forster's writings. If you'd like to know more about the Bloomsbury Group and the period of modernism as a whole, check out this video on Virginia Woolf.